let's go ahead and start with our next presentation. So we'll now hear from Maria Imelda Malgan. She's going to talk about the 2020 Census Operational Readiness Integrated Partnership and Communications Program. And that will be followed by committee discussion, and Megan Mari has agreed to try and facilitate that discussion. So, Maria?
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon. I'm Maria Olmedo Malagon. I am the Assistant Division Chief for over the Partnerships and Communication Program. I started in this position about 3 months ago. I'm really excited. I was in ACS before, but back in 2010, I worked on the campaign, so I'm really happy to come back to my roots. So today, I will be giving you a little bit of an overview on the campaign. On what we have so far, if I figure out the clicker. Okay, thank you. So pretty much as you know, the communications campaign is the program that we have established on the last couple of censuses to promote response to the decennial census. In particularly, we are very focused this time on self-response, making as easy as possible to understand and to access for individuals. In this digital age, we are really expecting for people to embrace the online option that we are giving to them. That's a big priority. It was also a priority of mine to promote that at ACS. It comes as a lower cost to the census, and at the end of the day, it's very easy to complete it. It's easier for our respondents. However, we take in consideration the fact that the digital methods are not available for everybody on the country, so we will also be promoting those. That's why, as you can see on our slides, we talk about a tailored contact strategy. We will be explaining respondents the different alternatives that they have, explain how self-response is better, is easier for them, but at the same time try to adapt our message to what they will be looking, either digital or paper questionnaires. At the same time, tailor means looking for the best methods to reach our different populations. I think as a communications person and as a communication nerd, as I like to describe myself, this campaign is extremely exciting because we look to reach everybody in the country. So at some point, every of the over 300 million people living in the United States will know, will learn something, will hear about our campaign in certain way. But they will hear about our campaign because it will be tailored to them. We will be definitely looking to reach more, those hard-to-count populations and those hard-to-reach populations, and we will be utilizing the methods that are better for them, either TV or social media. Like a lot of people talk about social media these days, but social media doesn't reach everybody or doesn't reach everybody in the same way. For example, we all talk about Snapchat these days. It's very exciting, it's something very common, it's the hit. But not necessarily our audience, the people that we really need that are more critical for us to convince to answer will be there. They may be in Facebook, they may be in Twitter, they may be in Instagram. So we will look for the best way to reach them. Through our campaign, we are going to use several components. We like to think that our 5 major components are website, mobile, media relations, paid advertising, statistics in schools, and social media. The partnership program will be central to everything. I don't like to think about the partnership program as one of the categories, but as something that we will be working on each and every aspect of our campaign. We know our partners will be involved on statistics in schools. We know our partners will be involved on our social media and website platforms. They will be helping us with media relations. So it's not something separate, it's something that is going to be together with everything. At the same time, again, going back to tailored methods, we will always look for the most efficient and effective way to reach the population. So whatever method works best for the different audiences is what we will be using. I would like to talk a little bit about the 2020 Partnerships Program. This has 3 components. I'm very excited about this because we already started this program. We had 2020 national partnerships, 2020 Community Partnerships and Engagement, those are the partnership and the local level, and the Tribal Partnerships Program. We have been already used the partnership program to support some of our tests in preparation for the 2020 census. We also formally start the partnership program a year earlier than last time. Last time we started in 2008. This time we start in 2017. And if you think about the tribal partnerships program, even before we had our tribal consultations last year. So I'm going to discuss a little bit more of national and local partnerships, and I know Dee will be later today here talking about tribal, so I don't plan to touch that. For national partnerships, what we want is to tap on those trusted voices at the national level, national organizations that, like the one that you represent, that can help us raise awareness both at the national and regional and local level. We want to leverage our current relationships to sponsorships and promotions and to direct messaging and build awareness. We want to organize activities that promote social and digital engagement. And in order to increase response rates, we want to use the data and advocacy that these organizations can offer us. We are actually starting this program, and I'm very excited to mention that the Associate Director for Communications have already put together a matrix team from people from different areas of the Communications Directorate, and they are working in organizing a kickoff of national national partnerships activities. So probably by the fall meeting, we will be giving you more details about that. In terms of local partnerships, this is what we use to amplify our message. We have a message at the national level, but we know that they are very trusted voices at the local level, that certain populations, particularly hard-to-count populations, are going to trust more. They are going to follow more. So that's why we focus the local partnerships program. We try to motivate diverse populations toward greater participation, mobilize community leaders to engage their constituents to be counted, and reaching out to populations with historically low response rates that are more challenging to count. How is this done? Well, we do this educating people about the 2020 census and foster self-response and cooperation with enumerators, encouraging community partners to motivate self-response, and engaging grassroots organizations to reach them. I have to say that a couple of months ago, Field Division started this program. I am very excited for what they have been doing. At this point, we have some partnership specialists in the community that have already done great things, putting together complete count councils at the state level, complete count committee at the local level. So I'm just looking forward to see what these partnership specialists will continue doing in the near future, because so far in just a couple of months, they have been doing great things. And as you probably heard, the Integrated Partnerships and Communications Program also has the Integrated Communications Contract, which was awarded to John and Rubicon in August of 2016. They have been tasked with planning, designing, producing, implementing, and monitoring and integrating communications programs for the decennial census. They have been doing several tasks that I am going to describe a little bit later, but mostly they have been working in developing the communications plan for the campaign. And that has been an effort that actually I have been involved with them since I started back at the end of January. And it has been a tremendous effort for from both Census Bureau and Team Y&R staff. We have had people that represent the different technical aspects of communications, working together with people who represent the operation to have a plan that really reflects what is needed to engage the population on this activity. Also, I have to say that this plan will be just the first incarnation. This is more like an outline of what we want to do in future years. Later, we are going to have a second version of the plan next year, and that version will be based on what on the results that we get from the research related to the campaign. Then, in 2019, we'll have a final plan that will reflect the creative process that the campaign is going to go, utilizing the research that we will obtain for later this year and early in 2018. These are more technical aspects of our contract with Team Y&R. Probably you know, but they participated on the campaign on Census 2000, and currently they have a group of subcontractors working, and through the campaign, they will have the same. They will be keep bringing companies on board to work with specific hard-to-count populations on with a specific task in communications that can be public relations or can be specific translations, etc. Here I have a list of the subcontractors that are currently working on the campaign. You can see the ones that are working on our hard-to-count populations as well as those subcontractors working on a specific communications task. Also, I wanted to show you the ones that are minority business, small business, veteran-owned business, etc. In the last couple of months, Team Y&R have been working on several tasks, as I mentioned. I think one of the most important, if not of the most important other than the communications plan, has been the listening tour that they have been doing with regional office and stakeholders. They visit all 6 regional offices and discuss the concerns of the staff at the regional level. And as well, they have been meeting with several stakeholders like the Founders Initiative, the undercount for children. We have a really nice meeting a couple of weeks ago with Naleo, in which some of the subcontractors for Team Y&R participated. They went over there to listen. So it's a really good time. They have been willing to learn a lot from both us and our stakeholders. Some of the thoughts from the regional office listening tour have been summarized in this slide. And this pretty much contains what the regional office say as a whole. And actually, we had a meeting with them a couple of weeks ago about the communications plan. And these teams were the ones who came to the conversation pretty frequently. So it's encouraged stakeholder engagement early and often. And we have a big lesson learned on 2010. To engage several companies and private sector partners such as Target or McDonald's, you have to start early. That's why our national partnerships team is starting to put activities together this summer, because if we want to partner with these companies to do something really big, like advertise on their stores or include us in some co-branding on their, I don't know, in their plates, in their trays, we need to start now. They usually plan way in advance, so this is something that we need to discuss with them now. Also, they mentioned the integration of the partnership program at the local level, which is something very key for us too. We know that in order to engage the community, we will have to go there and we will have to engage some actors in their communities that are more important than maybe a celebrity from TV. For example, like the local high school football team. That's something that we consider that is basic to do right now. Number 3 is trusted voices that are key. For example, in the Denver regional office, it was very clear that we need to involve tribal government leaders to support the participation of the AIN community in the census. Also, the recruitment, which will be extremely challenging, and that was something that we discussed a lot in the regional offices, but particularly with Los Angeles. There are concerns about the low unemployment rate that we have right now and how challenging will be getting employees for the census at the local level that represent the diversity of this community. So that also makes our recruitment advertising campaign a key element of the ICC contract. And number 5 is the messaging is key, specifically to address the diversity of the populations. And I think that's something that everybody in this committee feels close to. Like we need to start engaging that message with what is going to be as I say, the target, the tailored campaign for each of these audiences. Here I have the phases of the communications campaign, which this is still on the works. This is part of the communications plan, and you will be seeing more of this on the next 2 months. But I wanted to show it to you to give you an idea of what we have right now. Pretty much, we are planning to have on 2019 a strategic early education phase in which we will be educating our hard-to-count populations about the census that is coming, that is important. This is not going to be something at the national level. This is going to be reached more with local partnerships, with the statistics in school, and it will be very specific to those groups. So it will be something that not everybody will see, but only the people that really need to see, because we need to convince them of this. Like, for example, we know that we have some immigrant communities that they don't feel comfortable with the census, or they have never heard of this type of activity before. We need to start with them earlier than with the general population. Then we will have the awareness campaign, which will be within January and February, and that's when we will establish, we have the census, the 2020 census coming. You will have to go online, or you will be getting your form really soon. And then between February and April, we will have the motivation campaign, and those will be the actual ads that will tell people you have to fill your form now, either digitally or by paper. And starting in May, August, we will do the NARFU reminder campaign, which is the part that I don't want to reach, because I would really like for everybody to respond by one of the self methods, but we know that we have to do it, and that's the part when we will be asking cooperation with the numerators. Then we will go to a thank you campaign that will be mostly for our national and local partners, and that will be between September and November, and starting December, we will have the data dissemination campaign, in which we will be announcing our results and trying to get a lot of media coverage for those. On the next steps, I would like to show you our target dates right now. Most probably, the working group on outreach and communication on this committee will be receiving both the 2020 Census Integrated Communications Research Plan and the Communications Plan on June. And then we'll be conducting a review and presentation for the whole committee in August, and a discussion in the fall meeting. What we think is that this process for census staff has been very long, and the plan has over 200 pages. So we think that it's good for the committee to receive it in the summer, have discussions with Team Y&R and with the census staff involved on the campaign, have time to digest, prepare comments, and then discuss them with us. So you will have a presentation in the summer, but also you will have enough time to prepare your reaction, and we will receive it in the fall. So if probably you have noticed before that we will be getting the plan maybe at the late May or early June. The changes came because we made a conscious effort to extend the timeline to produce the plan, just because we wanted to have more involvement of everybody involved on the operations. For example, you just have a presentation with Jenny Kim that mentioned the language program and how we are starting a working group on language and communications. That came from those discussions, and that's why we're adding more time to our timeline, because we want to be more involved with people like, for example, with Jenny. Also, next steps, and this is not on the screen, I want to also mention that we are right now, other than working on the communications plan, working very hard on the start of the research program for the IPC. We have a group of folks from the Communications Directorate, the Decennial Statistical Studies Division, the Center for Survey Measurement, and my office, the Decennial Communications office, working on the ground, trying to move with Team Y&R the research efforts for the campaign, so we really can start the next fiscal year with our CBAMs and both quantitative and qualitative research in support of the campaign. So that is something that also you will be seeing more clearly on the research plan that will be released to you in June. And with that said, we can go to questions. Thank you for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have now gotten to actually talk to you about this before, so I cheated, y'all. I got extra time. But thank you so much. That really helps bring a lot of clarity, particularly the parts where you tell us where we're going to have the opportunity to weigh in. That's really helpful for folks. I think there's concerns that the IPC work is meaningfully different this time around. There have always been concerns about privacy. There have always been concerns about meeting different populations where they are and bringing them messages that are relevant to them. But I think the fear that folks feel right now around whether or not the government has access to personal information about them is demonstrably different than it was in earlier censuses. And the fear of whether or not there's going to be any issues with the information being held in a digital space feels different for folks than it did in previous censuses, though I know how hard you guys are working on that as well. And I think, all of those are legitimate concerns, and they're concerns you've had to deal with before. There's always been a need to let folks know that someone is going to be coming to their door to ask them questions about their life. There's always been a need to let folks know that something's coming in the mail and they should not do what I do and throw all their bills in a stack in the corner and pretend they're not there, but instead actually look through and fill out their census form. So I know that you've dealt with these concerns before, and I appreciate you filling us in on how you're sort of updating them for the new piece. I think something that weighs heavily for me are questions about the budget. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you're making your plan scalable, depending on what budget is allocated to the department, and then if we can just go around and do questions in a circle. I know everybody has questions, so we'll go that way.
Well, in terms of the budget, we have been allocated for the communications contract $415 million. We have been receiving some budget since last year. We kick off and we had enough budget to start the communications plan, and right now we have enough budget to start research activities. Definitely, we have concerns. I think every federal agency right now has concerns about the budget, particularly on the CR. It's difficult for us because for this particular task and for the 2020 census in general, our budget was lower last year than this year, and we were expecting to have more right now, and we don't. But we have been working on what we can and what we have. There are definitely several activities that we would like to be tackling right now, but we can't. So we decided to focus on what is more urgent for us, which is working on the communications plan and working on the research, and we have had enough funds to start those. Again, I would like to be doing a million things. I am, again, a communications nerd. There are all these ideas that I'm trying to put together and start working with them. But we decided to go for what was more important. And at the end of the day, the research is the most important thing to decide what are our hard-to-count and communities and how to reach them.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Luke?
Thanks, Reagan, and thanks, Maria, for your update. I know yesterday in our working group meeting, we spoke about this, and I really want to stress, and it puts more context when you talk about budget, how important. With recent executive action that occurred with our immigrant population, who originally were hard to count, I really impress upon, your team to really be strategic in how we can mend the trust back with those communities, because again, you're saying that budget-wise last year you were underfunded. I think it's going to cost more to kind of do some more targeted engagement and interaction with those in the community. And I'm speaking even from New York City, where Homeland Security came into, or ICE came into different neighborhoods in New York City, and took people from their stores or their job places. And I think that has a lasting effect that's really going to be hard to kind of convince those same people that, hey, trust me and fill out this census. So just want to really
Absolutely.
put that on the floor.
We totally understand that, and that's one of our risks right now, how the political environment it's influencing how people are going to respond to us. Again, I think right now it's key for us to conduct this research and understand how folks are are going to respond and react to our messaging. One very interesting thing is that Team YNR have bring several different, I would say, more innovative methods on research. It's not only a survey, it's not only a focus group, but they have been really bringing to the table very out-of-the-box ideas, like, for example, conducting these panels of trusted community leaders. So it's not only asking people, which I must say that sometimes a respondent just answer what they think you want to hear. Going to these trusted voices in the community and having deep interviews with them actually give us extra access to the community, not usually the answer that we want to hear, but the answer of someone who knows how this type can give us those type of examples and say, this particular community, this is what you have to do with them. So I'm very excited for the methods that Team YNR is bringing to the table, because I think it's much more innovative of what we have done before. At the same time, I'm very happy, again, that we have our local partnership program already working. It's not at full scale, it's not the thousands of partnership specialists that we plan to have on 2019, but we already have some people putting that bug in the ear of folks, like, we are here and you can trust us and we are part of your community. We look like you, we act like you, we know what you're experiencing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy.
Together a very comprehensive plan. However, I was wondering if you thought about or have some strategies in place to examine the effectiveness of the partnership program, such that you can evaluate and that would then inform the next phases of the plan?
Yes, actually, we will have an evaluation of the whole partnership and communications program, and that is separated from me, which is what it has to be, because I should not be evaluating myself or working with the people who are going to evaluate my work. But it's something that we have plans, and my understanding is that the contract for this particular evaluation will come out later this year.
Okay.
That's great, and I wonder if any of the other folks from Census can tell us if the IPC working group will have an opportunity to weigh in on those evaluative measures as well? If anyone knows?
I'm trying to look if Marianne it's here, but I imagine, but I imagine that, of course, the committee will be involved, particularly the working group.
Great, thank you so much. Go, please.
This isn't so much a question for Maria, but I didn't see it quite anywhere in the agenda, and it goes to outreach, which is, I know that there's going to be about 20 area census offices that will be open by 2019. At what point will it be determined where those offices will be located? What's the projected timeline for all of that?
It's a great question. Let me clarify a few things, I think. We are working now on the notification and the rollout of the total number of area census offices that we'll be using in the 2020 census. I think if I was kind of looking into a crystal ball, we might even be able in a position to share that number by the end of next month. The decisions and the methodology have been determined. We're now working through that process, and that would be the number of area census offices for the census itself. We will be opening about 40, actually, area census offices early. And I should say earlier than the bulk. And those 40 offices would be in support of the address canvassing operation. We're working now on identifying and finalizing those locations. While when we announce the total number of area census offices, we'll have some thoughts on initial locations. The final areas that are determined really occur through the leasing process. So it will be some time when we see where there is available space in those geographic entities that we'll know that. I don't know if that answers your question or if you had a more specific point.
I think that answered. I was curious would the community have a chance to sort of provide some feedback on that? Not really.
Not really. I mean, the process is really a methodological process that we've utilized first to determine the number of offices that are needed based on the projected workload that we will have, and then to delineate the boundaries of those offices based on a set of characteristics and data that feed that, and then from there's additional characteristics that feed that model to determine that initial location. The ultimate decision point is about availability of space. Sure.
That makes a ton of sense. Hassan?
Thank you, Megan. I want to go back for a second to Luke's concerns regarding the sense of fear that really is a very, very coming from community perspective, coming from an organization that embedded in a community. This is an overwhelming sense of fear nowadays. And and to begin with, immigrant groups have been hard to reach communities, including language barriers and so forth. So the question is, are we really talking about this as a development that needs a focused strategy in terms of how we can overcome these obstacles? And second is that when we do these partnership and campaigns, do we have a degrees of assigned in terms of which partnerships comes first and where we need to put emphasis? I wonder if there are any degrees of partnerships due to urgency and based on track record previously in terms of how hard to reach some of these communities. Again, let me give you a sense of fears. In Southwest Detroit, which is a majority Latino community, people are given, in the Latino community, they're given their neighbors and their friends power of attorneys in case something happened to them where their kids will go. So this is serious. This is something that needs to be addressed by the census. The other question here is that are these subcontractors obviously sharing metrics with you? And eventually, are we going to see some of these metrics and some of these goals in terms of how they're going to go about doing the work that they need to be doing?
Thank you for your question. So first of all, in terms of the fear, I totally understand. I totally understand. I can identify myself with that fear because I represent one of the communities that I think had that type of fear. And I understand, and I think I bring that message to the table for the campaign. I think I cannot emphasize enough how important the research is going to be later this year. Right now, as I mentioned, our plan, the one that we will be presenting in the summer, will be more like an outline, like a roadmap of what we are planning to do. Once we have the research, we will have the actual messages that we can present and say, okay, these are 1, 2, 3, the top three things that we will be doing for each audience, and how we plan to address those concerns, specifically the concern of fear that again is one of our number one risk. Second, in terms of the partnerships and how we're going if we are going to give more priority, definitely. The way that both the partnership programs work, but particularly with national and local partnerships, we try to make to give more priority to certain partners just because we know that that's what is going to be needed for those particular communities. I know it will be great, I don't know what organization I could mention to have on the table, like AARP, which I have partnered in the past for other organizations that I have worked with. And it's great to have them, but maybe that's not our heart to count. Maybe it's more important for us to have a really good presence with, for example, at this moment with the Latino organizations like NALEO, like LULAC, like La Raza, or even more with organizations that represent the Latino groups at the very local level. So yes, we have a lot of interest to work with a number of organizations, but we will be giving priority to the organizations that we know represent the groups that will be harder to count for us. And number 3, of course, we will have metrics through the campaign. And we will be providing updates to you, like our plan for the fall right in agenda right now is to have a further discussion of your comments on the communications plan. But as we keep moving, I imagine that we will be in the agenda every 6 months to discuss with you more and more about how the campaign is moving, and part of that will be giving you access to our metrics, our plans, and how those are developing.
That's super helpful, and I think a lot of us are happy to hear that there will be a focused strategy around some of the communities we're talking about. Didis?
Okay, so first off, I'm going to take off my helpful NAC chair hat, and I'm going to put on my California Census outreach hat. So I just kind of cracked up when you said, oh, Y&R is doing really innovative things like pulling together, panels of hard to count. And I'm like, how's that innovative when we did that in 2000 and in 2010 in California? But and I can certainly share with them everything that the state of California has done to count all Californians. In fact, putting aside, millions of dollars of their own to do locally based, we know Californians, be California, be counted. And I would be more than glad to share that with them. But I also want to stress to NAC members that live outside the DC area that I would take on personally connecting with your local state and local folks, encouraging them to start getting involved now and not waiting for the national sort of outreach and partnership. So that's just part of that. So with my hat on as California, I know we're all struggling for budgets, and I'm also fighting to get additional budgets for outreach there. Something we used both in 2000 and in 2010, when we didn't have that many dollars in 2010 because of the economy, is we had our own state agency working group. What does that mean? That means state agencies touch millions of Californians on a daily basis, whether it's in DMV or it's in Department of Social Services. But one of the most effective things that I actually put a portion of my very small budget aside was to do agreements with a federal program called the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, where I had to pay the WIC providers to give me part of their 10 minutes that they have with young women with children, where they counsel them on nutrition, so that they could spend 4 or 5 minutes talking to them about the importance of the census and maybe even, showing them where to go and giving them a lot of stuff. That was high touch and highly effective, but I had to pay them. So my question comes back around to having, if you want to save some money on the federal level instead of spending all this stuff in your partnerships, can you partner with federal programs that have high touch, programs for some of these hardest to count people? Can you have an interagency agreement with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which I believe WIC falls under, correct me if I'm wrong, and say, hey, can you allow your partners that give this education 10 minutes, whatever it is, every month, 3 or 4 minutes during this time period, this time period, and this time period, to talk about the importance of the census, whatever messages you want to give. So I don't know if there's, you have an answer to that, but I'm saying consider it and also think about other ones.
That's something that I have in consideration. In fact, that's an idea that I have crossed my mind because I have done that in the past. In my previous position before coming back to Census, I was the director of a communications campaign in USDA, and that's one of the things that we did. We actually worked with, I was at Food Safety and Inspection Service, we worked with FNS, which is the agency that managed WIC, to make that same connection, like include our program on the talks, and we include slides of our talking points on the training for the WIC educators, etc. So that's something that we have been thinking for a while. We have been thinking that for ACS too, because there are several federal agencies that we partner with and that definitely work with us for the ACS, and probably through their programs they can be promoting more census programs. So that's an idea that it's under the table and on the table, and I hope that we can move with.
Well, it certainly saved the state of California their own dollars to have people do it in those areas. So, okay, and so I apologize to my NAC members that always hear me go on this, but for the benefit of the new ones that are here, I always go on my census in schools didn't work in 2000 for us, it didn't work in 2010. So in 2010, what we decided to do, again, with our very small portion of money, in talking with the California Teachers Association, which is a very strong union, very powerful union, we have really strong standards, as I think most states do,
that are really tied to curriculum. And if you talk to a lot of teachers, they're like, I don't have time for that beautiful thing that Scholastic pulled out to figure out where to put that in. So we took, the highest Title I and Title III, whatever programs in the state, and we ranked them, and then we met with their county offices of education, which I'm sure it'll be different titles in other states, with their curriculum developers. And we said, okay, let's look at, hey, in 8th grade, my daughter's in 8th grade right now, she said, they cover the Constitution. And luckily, Hamilton's out, so it makes them even more excited about that whole thing. So she comes home in January and she said, Mom, we talked about the census. Because she knows I'm a census nerd. I said, really, what did they say? She said, basically that it happens every 10 years for purposes of representation. I said, did they say anything else? No. And I said, well, what did your classmates say? They said, they're not filling that out. There is no way. These are 8th graders. And I said, what did you say? She's like, I jumped up and I gave them all the reasons from, hearing me talk about it all the time of why they should do it. And I said, well, in 2010, like this we have right here, we worked with the San Diego Office of Education, and we actually took History and Social Science, HSS standard 12.6, and it let them rewrote something on census and redistricting. So my point is, it's got to be turnkey because teachers don't have time to be like, oh, what can I do? But if they're like, hey, this standard I have to teach in January, I can just take what they have and put it in. They don't have to, teachers have so much on their plates right now. So, doing a great Scholastic thing, that's great for, have a Census and Schools Week, but I encourage, and I don't know how you want to work with the individual states or their counties, or their county offices of education or their state superintendents, because I know each state is just a little bit different with their standards, to make it plug and play.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't take a teacher more than 5 minutes to figure out where she could put it in her curriculum. So that's, yeah, and I have, if
Thank
you
you,
want.
and I absolutely agree with you. I keep bringing, I'm like you, I keep bringing these to meetings, and I don't understand why. When I was in 4th grade, census was mentioned on my social studies book, and I was so excited on the 1990 census because finally it came to me because I saw it in the book, and I'm going to help my parents to fill it because I was excited because I have seen it on the book. So I don't understand what is not part of the curriculum now, and if you ask me one of my goals on the long term of what I would like to be, something that the 2020 census helps is that to include everything census on books regularly, because I definitely don't understand what is not there.
Yeah, when I retire from doing all this, I'm working with the textbooks to get it in, just like we got recycling in the science textbooks in the late 80s. So, okay, and then my last thing, I promise. In 2010, we did these statewide convenings, which were really readiness assessments, partnering with the U.S. Census Bureau, the field offices that were there, bringing nonprofits, community foundations, and the hard-to-count representatives for each site. So to put these together, it wasn't one size fits all. We had panels about hard-to-count and who the hard-to-count is, and then we had breakout tables where everybody talked about who the hard-to-count were in their communities. We brought the big maps that our Department of Finance demographics unit prepared, and we had roundtables throughout the state, and it was basically our statewide readiness assessment. Are you ready? So we're hoping to do this, at least my plan, is to come back, so do that in 2018. Would love to do something on April 1st, 2018 to launch statewide. Come back in 2019, back to those communities. That gives us to do a retooling, if we need to refocus, if something changes nationally that we need to reassess. It gives us that flexibility. So we're really focused on capacity building throughout the state and having them know their communities. And then last, I always have to say this, ethnic media is not free media. That's all for my soapbox today.
It's not.
Thank you so much. You always have such interesting things to say. But what your comments made me think that it might be useful for you. A lot of us work with communities, and we know how our communities are being touched by federal agencies, and so it might make sense for the IPC working group just to put together a quick kind of like recommendation list for our next recommendation session. That might help you all as you're thinking about what federal partnerships to connect with. So we're like super late. I know Didas really wants to hear this next presentation on Luca. So we've got Arturo, we've got James on the phone, we've got Alisu, and we've got Yolande. And let's, if we can try to, I know it's hard because we all have so many thoughts, but if we can try to keep it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Maria, for all the work you're doing. I really do appreciate the constraints you're under with regard to the lack of all the resources you had to do everything you can do. So I don't know if you can do this right now, but one of the things I would like to know is what are the things that you have postponed or are not doing that you originally had planned to do because of your budget constraints?
Right now, at this very moment, we haven't postponed anything from this particular fiscal year. We are on track doing everything that we have planned for this fiscal year. That being said, as budgets are very delayed and we have budget constraints, there are some things for next year that the agency have suggested, the Team YNR, and we don't know if we are going to be
Do you
able
know-
to
Maria,
move
if
on
I
with
may.
them.
Thank you. Hi, Artur. It's a great question. I think the
Hi,
best
Lisa.
thing would be, I know I snuck in on you.
I know, you cut your hair.
I did. Thank you for noticing. I think the best thing to do would be for us to get back to you with what that information is. We've made some, and as you know, some very deliberate decisions in order to ensure that the 2018 end-to-end test and the 2020 census itself remain on the critical path for execution, and there have been program impacts across the board. I announced some of those at the program management review in January. Right now, with where we are, we're still operating under a continuing resolution, and I think as we get more firm details about what fiscal year 17 will look like for us, we can more accurately answer that question. I have no problem getting back to you, though, with some of the specifics.
That'd be terrific. And also, if the 2018 end-to-end tests, if that's going to be restored, perhaps, if you have the resources for that, and what
Yeah.
that communications component would look like. The other
Sure.
point I wanted to raise, and it has already been echoed by several committee members, but I want to underscore it, is that every decennial census has been characterized by external circumstances. So for example, the 2010 census was the first census to happen after 9/11, and it happened during the Great Recession. Those two events affected conducting the 2010 census, and so we acted in certain ways in response to those circumstances. For example, given it being the post-9/11 census, the first one, many of the advocacy groups worked with the Department of Justice and the Department of Commerce to get a written interpretation of confidentiality laws on the books that gave us a tool that said that in fact Title 13 superseded the Patriot Act, and that confidentiality was assured by Title 13. That was very important, not just for the grassroots community to know, but more importantly, for the trusted messengers that you're going to be relying on to know. The second thing we did is that we had to force the communications consultant to pivot from a feel-good census to a census that is going to be happening when people are losing their homes. And reminding people that if somebody is moving in with you because they lost their home, because they lost their mortgage, they need to be counted at your address. So again, adjusting to the circumstances. It appears that this next decennial census, the circumstances will be where certain communities, as has been already referenced, will have heightened fear of contact with federal employees for justifiable reasons. So one of my recommendations is that as you do your research, not only do we need to know what's going to work in reaching the American public about participating in the census and assurances of confidentiality, but what tools and what messages are we going to have for the trusted messengers, for them to be willing to stand up and provide those assurances themselves? Because at this moment, I can tell you, it's not just the people in Didas's daughter's class, those children who are saying, I'm not filling out that form. It's the trusted messengers who are saying, I can't provide assurances to my parishioners, to my students, to my patients, that confidentiality will be assured. And this is the new circumstances that this census will be conducted under, and the communications plan needs to be responsive specifically to those circumstances.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for saying that 1,000,000 times more clearly than I ever could. I really appreciate it. Do we want to go to James on the phone? Is that possible? James, are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I wanted to follow up on a point. I guess Edith had kind of made it, but one of the things that we've done with our coalition is census is obviously one of our top priorities, as it is for many of the organizational members who are on the. And the question I have is, when we're working with those foundations that are interested in funding our census outreach efforts, Maria, do you have any guidelines in place for how we can coordinate directly with you through the partnership program to make sure the message we're sending is consistent with what the census is doing, and also to make sure that we're supplementing your efforts, we're not replacing your efforts?
I don't have the guidelines with me here, but definitely I think we can provide to the advisory committee office for your usage, yes.
Yeah, that would be great, because I know it's something that we are expecting to get quite a bit of funding. We just want to make sure that we're going to use that funding in the most cost-effective way, in the way that's going to be, get us to where we need to be and increase participation.
Okay, thank you.
Much appreciated. I'm sure all of us would love to see
Yeah,
this,
probably.
so thanks so much. Alicia?
Yes. So I think, there, as many of you have already mentioned, there are two big points of concern with the immigrant community. One is the confidentiality of the data they provide, and the other is just, the showing up of the field representative at their home. And so I would think that a lot of the emphasis, and maybe through the trusted messengers, trusted advisors or whatever, in the community has to be, and of course it furthers census goals as well, is first provide assurance of the confidentiality. And then it's fill it online so nobody will show up at your house, right? I mean, that has to be the message. If many communities don't have such easy access to the web, or they have, but they're not so web literate that they can fill the census by themselves. And we've observed some of that in testing, and it becomes very difficult when people use the web but really just use Facebook, and they don't understand a lot of the conventions.
Yes.
So if the message is, fill it out online because we all want to avoid, we know how people feel about having somebody from the government come and knock on your door, so let's avoid that, let's prevent it. It's an awkward situation because Census is asking for data for the government, and, different sides of the government that are not, going into the same, towards the same purpose here, so.
Yeah, agree. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Yolanda, you want to round us out?
Yes, I wonder if we can perhaps go down parallel tracks and get to the ground level of those persons in the community on an earlier basis. Just this past Friday, 2 people who were coming to court were arrested in the New Jersey court system, and the Chief Justice, like the Chief Justice in California, issued a letter to the feds asking them not to do that. We have people who are, domestic violence or witnesses. So I think we need to get to those persons in the community perhaps at an earlier time. We had a program in New Jersey 4 years ago, and it was persons who had tickets from sometimes 5 or 10 years old. And we, the court, went out into the community with the churches and asked, could we not have these people come to the court in order to be able to get rid of the tickets that they had had over the years, but come to a community church. And the turnout was really tremendous because they were afraid to come to the court. So, and when I say parallel tracks, I mean, I know what you're doing with the marketing tool, but we might need to, as you say, pivot and go down to the community level with these individuals at a much sooner basis. The other thing is in 2018, the American Bar Association has a national conference. And our court has participated at times going to this national conference. You might want to work with or partner with the American Bar Association to see if they can get something in their curriculum this is a national conference on the importance of the census. Because you're going to have a lot of school teachers who be attending this conference. And in the past, you have had a lot of curricula for teachers coming there from the national basis, saying how they can teach law-related education. So to see if you can get that on the budget, on the agenda as well. This is about the time you should be contacting the ABA. The conference normally takes place in 2018, in the fall of 2018. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
So unlikely partners and early partnerships.
Yes.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for their thoughts on all of that and for letting us take a little bit more time than we probably should have. Didis? Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, now we will hear from Brian Timko on the LUCA, the local update of census addresses, followed by committee discussion.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Didis, first of all, for championing the program, not just through California, but through this committee and all the work you've done. So, and thanks for getting us on the agenda. So, I want to start off just with a real brief background on the LUCA program. The LUCA program kind of came from some information out of the 1990 census when there were concerns that we were undercounting the population, some justifiable concerns, and they evaluated it and looked at our address frame, and were concerned that our address frame wasn't as accurate as it needs to be to take the census. So they recognized a good address frame is how we deliver questionnaires to households. So Congress passed the Census Address List Improvement Act of 1994. Oh, thank you. And which later became Public Law 103-430, and this did two things to strengthen our address frame. One is it allowed us to work with the United States Postal Service. So because of this act, we were allowed to get the delivery sequence file updates from the post office. And so for the last over 20 years, we've been getting twice a yearly deliveries at a minimum address updates from the post office. The other thing that this Census Address List Improvement Act did was it authorized the Census Bureau to share our address lists with tribal, state, and local governments. So it not only authorized it, but required us to provide an opportunity to have tribal, state, and local governments review our address list prior to taking the census. So recognizing that tribal, state, and local governments are the authoritative source on addresses, and if they could become stakeholders in this process, we'd be much better off for the census. So LUCA, the first time we did LUCA was in 2000, in support of the 2000 census, we had the LUCA 98-99 program, what it was called, and then we made some improvements going into the 2010 census for the 2010 LUCA program. And just as kind of a note here, in the past two LUCAs that we've done, we've added around 3 million addresses from our partners to the census. This is 3 million good addresses that were enumerated. So we had 3.1 million addresses added to the census frame that we've never seen before the census or before the LUCA program. And then in 2010, we had 2.9 million addresses added, as the first time we ever saw them was in the LUCA program, and they were successfully enumerated. So this program's a tremendous benefit to the Census Bureau. What's new for 2020? So we've offered a streamlined participation. I'll talk a little bit more about what the participation is going to look like in some following slides, where it's a full address list review. We're providing the digital address list in a more standard format. We had a pipe to limited text format the last 2 decades, which about half our help desk calls were because of the pipe to limited text format. So we're going to a common limited CSV file that can be easily read by spreadsheet software or database software and text viewers. We're including ungeocoded addresses. This is a big thing that's new for us. So when we get Postal Service addresses from the post office, they provide us the state and county code that address is in, and that's all the geographic information we get from them on this, besides the zip code. And it's up to us to determine what census block it's in and what census tract it's in, and by and large we do that by what we call geocoding it to the address range and street centerline files that we have. So if we have the street name and the address range in Tiger, we're able to generally geocode the addresses. We have about 1.6 million ungeocoded addresses, and we're going to provide those as part of our LUCA files to state and county partners. And the reason behind this is since we know what state and county it is and we can provide it to them, and this could help them focus their review. So if we have a bunch of ungeocoded addresses, it's most likely we're missing the roads, it's a new subdivision or new development. And so we're hoping this can help them kind of narrow the focus of their review. We are requiring multi-unit within structure identifiers. So if somebody's adding a multi-unit address, we're requiring them to give us the within structure identifier, like apartment 1, apartment 2, apartment 3. In the past, we've done an in-field address canvassing to validate LUCA records, 100% in-field canvassing, where we've gone out and walked all the streets, and we've been able to kind of use that operation to fill in the gaps where we didn't have within unit identifiers, but we're asking for those in LUCA this time around. We are including residential structure coordinates. I'm going to show a little slide on what that looks like a little bit later, but we have, and this is, I think, one of the things I'm most excited about at LUCA this time around. Through the last decennial census, we went out and with the handheld devices that most of you are aware and collected GPS points for most of the housing units in the country. Through the past 4 years, we've undergone a GSS operation, Geographic Support System operation, where we've been using tribal, state, and local government files to not only collect new addresses from our partners, but actually realign our address points. And so we've actually, we've moved 58 million address points to line up with the local government's file, to the tribal, state, and local files. So we're excited about providing this back to our partners in a sense, so when they do their LUCA review and they see our structure coordinates, our map spots, and they overlay it with theirs, they're going to line up if we use their file to do that with. And so that makes their review a lot easier. They can just do a point-to-point comparison to identify where we might be missing housing units. We are allowing partners to also submit structure coordinates back to us. So we've seen a lot of files that tribal, state, and local governments have that have structure coordinates. In the past, we've required them to provide the state, county, and tract and block geocodes with their LUCA address list. They can still do that, or they can provide the structure coordinate location as well. So they can provide the geographic information for their addresses in 2 different ways now. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about this in details on a slide coming up, but we're also allowing participants to submit non-city style addresses for the first time. So where are we now? We've completed the advance notice mailing. This was done in January, so we've sent out roughly 83,000 advance notice mailing letters. It included a letter, an information guide, and a contact information update form. It went out to all 39,000 tribal, state, and local government highest elected officials, as well as former LUCA contacts, former state-level contacts that we have, boundary and annexation survey contacts. So we kind of casted a fairly wide net with this mailing, just announcing that the program is going to be kicking off in a year. One thing that surprised us is we asked people to send the contact information forms back to us, even if they didn't have any contact information to update. And we expected a few thousand of those to come back. We ended up getting 46,000 contact information update forms back for our partners, covering 27,000 governments, and including all state-level governments except for one. So we've got, at the state level, every government sent something back except one. The one that didn't send us back something, I've already spoken to their state data center official, and he's well engaged with LUCA. He just didn't send a thing back to us. So we're excited that the level of engagement from our partners seems really high this early on. We opened up our geographic program support desk as well, where we've, at our National Processing Center, and we've received 903 calls as of last week to the help desk, and most of the calls are related to what is the contact information update form, how can we turn it, how do we fill it out, and the third most often asked question is about the LUCA schedule, what's the schedule? So the other thing we did was, and I'm going to get into this in a little more detail later too, is we posted the address block count list on our LUCA website. So we've posted for every government, they can go online and download their count of addresses by block, and I'll discuss this on the next slide. So we're also in the process of developing the systems needed to prepare and create the LUCA materials. It's a fairly complex task to pull the address data and create the products that we're going to do. We're in the process of refining our matching systems to match incoming LUCA addresses to not only our master address file, but the GSS records that I spoke of that we got from partners, and also our admin records database. And then we're also trying to finalize a lot of our training materials that we're going to have as we go out and do our more detailed technical trainings in October. So I mentioned the address count list. So on our website, you can go and select any tribal, state, or local government and download by block a count of not only residential addresses but group quarters. And so this is an example of Prince George's County, Maryland, which is the county we're in right now. The left side of the block count list contains the geographic information for each block, a state code, county code, tract block, and a block GeoID. That block GeoID actually allows you to join this table to our public shapefiles or block level shapefiles, so you could map it if you wanted to do something like that. It includes the total number of residential addresses and the total number of group quarters. The group quarters is something we added fairly recently to our GSS feedback based on feedback from state partners who really like having group quarters called out separately. And so in this example, I want to call your attention to the third block down, which is block 3002, where there's 0 residential housing units but 8 group quarters. And that could cause, if you're just scanning through that, you could kind of wonder what's going on there. And if you used either our Tiger shapefiles that are on the web or our Tiger Web interface, that's if you're familiar with Tiger Web, you can go on and it functions very similarly to like Google Maps or Bing Maps. You could pull up the imagery and the map and the block level and find out block 3002 is actually the University of Maryland campus, and all those group quarters are the dorms. And what's exciting about what we're doing here is you can actually go in the reverse direction. You could actually identify areas where there's new growth in a community and there's new houses being built. Just look at our Tiger Web or our shapefiles, find the block number, and then go backwards to our count list and see if we're kind of keeping up with the growth or not. Since it's block level data, it's high level data. It's count of addresses, so it's not going to be extremely precise as far as identifying, if one house was built in a block of 20 or 30 housing units, it'll be difficult to do, but it could identify areas where when you get your LUCA materials a year from now, it can help you focus on what areas to review. Yes.
So Brian, I just have a quick question. So some locals have their own count of housing units at the block, and so I recommend that they compare, because if the census has, 17 like in this first block, and you have 28 on your count list, that'll give you kind of a flag of where you should be looking. So that's one thing. Also, I just wanted to I have a question that you can answer a little bit later, is the definition of group quarters. I know our state data center and probably other state data centers are struggling with how does the US Census define group quarters, and how does the state define group quarters? Like, say it could be a dormitory, but it's apartment style where students are living, but there's a shared kitchen. Is that a dormitory, or is that group quarters, or is that apartments? Like what, so I think some clarification on how group quarters are defined would be really helpful for state and local entities.
Okay, thank you. And actually, you kind of walked into my next slide really well, so I appreciate that. So another thing we have available is a geocoder tool. So this is something we have had on our public website for a while now, where up till recently, you could upload as many as 1,000 addresses in a batch file, and we would geocode those addresses. We would provide the state, county, tract, and block we believe the address is in based on, this is part is important, based on our address range and our street centerline files in Tiger. We're not doing a Title 13 match. And so one of the things we did was we increased the capacity to do up to 10,000 records at a time. 90% of our governments have fewer than 10,000 addresses in their community. And so by increasing the capacity to 10,000 records at a time, we're reaching out to at least 90% of our governments. And if they wanted to clip their file in half, there's 95% of our governments have fewer than 20,000 records. And we also, we're developing right now, we're finalizing the testing on a batch geocoder for large governments to use as well, where they could submit the file through a secure web process, and then we'll do the geocoding at night for them and provide the feedback the following day.
And BAS is Border and Annexation Survey. I don't know if I said BAS, you might want to, it's the Border and Annexation.
Boundary and Annexation Survey.
And it's due, at least from locals, on May 31st. So say you live in Irvine, California, and they did this huge housing unit, in between last time and this time, and if they didn't add it, you're going to miss all those people altogether. So you want to make, or it's going to go to some other county. You just need to make sure that those borders are correct.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so this tool could actually help, in combination with our LUCA block count list, it could help you kind of figure out where your addresses are, where our addresses are, and compare the two, just to get a sense on where we're at leading into LUCA. So I mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to kind of call it out. Non-city style addresses. In the past, we have not allowed partners to provide non-city style addresses to us. It was very difficult for us to match location descriptions, and we were concerned with basically duplicating our addresses, our address list in these rural areas. Recently, an idea was proposed from people in field division, our regional directors out west, that if they could provide the structure coordinates, would we be able to do spatial matching with our existing map spots or existing structure coordinates and do the comparison that way, do the matching that way? And so if we had a location description address and they provided one, we'd be able to match it using our structure coordinates. We did some initial testing and found out, we think we can do this. So we are going to allow partners to provide, as long as they provide the map spot location for this, location description addresses, rural route addresses, or highway contractor route addresses. And this is important for areas such as Alaska, and in the kind of the Southwest, where all they may have is non-city style addresses. So this kind of opens up the participation, methodology, or opens up the participation for those governments. We're not accepting PO boxes because we can't trace them directly back to housing units. whoops, got excited. So I want to briefly touch on the participation methods. So we have kind of 3 media types that we're rolling out for this LUCA program. One is the GUP software, and then we're also going to offer paper participation and digital format participation. And you can, for at least paper and digital, you can mix and match. So what is GUPS? GUPS is our Geographic Update Partnership software. It's a self-contained, customized kind of GIS software that we've designed to be used by people who are not familiar with GIS. It's built on something called QGIS, which is an open source GIS platform. It has the tools to be a fully functional GIS with a lot of customization in it for people that are familiar with GIS software, but it's really built for partners that can kind of navigate, you know, Microsoft Windows, Google Maps, and not much more. And what happens when you load the software, your map of your community will show up, the block list, and then a address count list on the right will show up. And everything's integrated. If you add an address record to the address list, the block list will be updated. You can add addresses by just clicking on a dot on a map, spot on a map. All the geocode information will automatically get filled in. And then you just have to enter the 101 Main Street or whatever the address is that you're adding. You can upload your own address and do some comparisons to it as long as it's in the right format. We can tell the partner what format to upload the data in, and then it'll do comparison between the 2 data sets. So we're excited about this software. We've done recently some fairly large scale testing on it, and it's working fairly well. So we're going to be excited to roll this out to our partners. The digital address list, we've tried to simplify it from last time. If you look at the street name fields in 2010, our street name fields were fairly large because that's kind of how we store to the map. We have a street name prefix qualifier, prefix direction, prefix type, street name. We realized when working with the GSS, our partners were giving us the data in their native format. And that was really eye-opening for us because we could see how tribal, state, and local governments stored their data. And a lot of times it wasn't concatenated like this, or it wasn't parsed out like this. And so we realized, you know, asking them to parse their data out is really complicated, and it's not easy to do, and it's easier for them to concatenate it if they have it parsed. So we decided to kind of flip it around and concatenate our data set so that they could provide just one street name field, one house number field. We added a few things to this. One is the GeoID field, which allows them, the state, county, tract, and block field, and this will allow them to easily join the data set to our shapefiles. We added an address use flag. So the address use flag is an optional field that we're asking from our partners. It'll go out blank in their materials in the data set. But we're asking when we get if they provide us addresses, if they know if the address is used for mailing, location, or both, we'd like to know that because it may change how we try and enumerate. In the past, we've gotten city-style addresses that look like they're mailable, but they were E911 addresses. And we weren't able to mail to them. And so if they could tell us ahead of time how that address is used, it might inform how we enumerate the address. And then we also added, it's not highlighted on here, but we also added a couple of group quarters fields, the GQ name and also a facility name as well, to help partners identify group quarters. And as I mentioned, we do have a paper address list. Here's just an example of what it'll most likely look like. I know that's really hard to read, but there's a MAF ID number, a state, tract, county code. It's basically our block level information on the left, and then in the middle is our address, and then we'll have the group quarters in the middle as well, or location descriptions. And so our maps. So we have a couple of options for map files. If you're not using the GUPS, if you're using the GUPS, you'll get the digital file set, basically. If you're choosing paper maps, you'll get, I'll zip into this. So actually, I'll mention our digital maps. Our digital maps are going to be our partnership shapefiles. So they're currently online right now for the BASS program. And I think at least our partners that use the shapefiles are familiar with them. Our paper maps are going to be actually kind of twofold. One is our large format block maps, which are the kind of wall-size block maps that we're providing our partners. Those will be paper, and they'll be able to identify, what block and address may be in a census tract or block. Alongside of that, if they request paper maps, we're also going to send them a DVD. They don't have to use it, but we're going to have a DVD of block-level PDF maps. We wanted to include structure coordinates, the map spots, on our large format maps, but on testing, it was ridiculous. As far as the scaling was so big that even small towns would need like 50 to 100 map sheets. And then when we got to the county level files, it became too much. And so what we decided to do, we still wanted to provide map spots to partners. So we're going to be creating block level maps. So if you look here, the circled block 2000 on the large format map on the left, a portion of that block level map on the right is what you're seeing on the right side. So they'll get a block level map for block 2000, and it has all the map spots, and those map spot numbers will link back to the addresses for that block. So when they have their paper address list or electronic address list, they can kind of link back between the addresses. And if they wanted to, if they have the ability to print the block map out, they could print the block map out and add another map spot on there for us if they wanted to, and then on an added address. That's optional. They don't have to do that, but it would help us if they did. So it would have been ideal to be able to provide the maps on the map spots on the large format maps, but its scalability didn't work for us. Okay, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. So this is our current Census Bureau Regional Office layout. In the past, last LUCA, we did 563 promotional trainings for LUCA and 642 technical trainings, over 1,200 trainings. And when I say trainings, this is specifically scheduling a LUCA workshop at a location or a LUCA promotional event at a location, bringing people in and doing a training. Right currently, we have there are 6 regional offices. We have a couple of regional offices that only have one geographer. Like for Denver is a good kind of call out here. They have one geographic coordinator. And so we've kind of looked at what ways can we support, in this new alignment where we have fewer geographers to support us, how can we kind of go out and do these same things? And so we worked with our Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs, along with field division, along with our data dissemination staff and geography division. We're kind of, wrapping a big hug around the entire Census Bureau looking for support, and they're supporting us. They're doing a great job of kind of scheduling workshops, and what they've decided to do is kind of look at where governments were already gathering. So finding, getting time at a, Michigan Association of Towns and Townships meeting or a California counties meeting, and trying to find out if these groups are already getting together and it's our same audience, let's go to them at those locations. So we've started going to all these state level meetings, regional level meetings, more local meetings, and getting on the agenda and kind of promoting the LUCA program through that way. And so it's actually been fairly successful. I know today, actually, I don't know how it went yet, but I know our Atlanta geographer, our Philadelphia geographer is doing a Kentucky webinar that had over 350 people registered to listen in on it. So we're excited about that. The feedback that we've got as far as the webinars that we're doing are good, and there's a lot of interest in it. And so we're excited about that, but it's just, it's kind of how we're trying to adapt to work in our new reality of only 6 regions, fewer geographers, and we're looking to hire more once hopefully the budget turns around. We have actually approval to hire, I believe, 6 regional office geographers, or have at least 6 regional office geographers or specialists in each region, and so hopefully, once we clear this next budget hurdle, we can fill that out. So the current schedule, I've mentioned we've mailed our advance notice mailing out in January. We're conducting the promotional workshops. The LUCA invitation and registration materials will go out in July of 17, so only a couple months away now. The formal LUCA training workshops will begin in October. And then the review materials begin shipping or be shipped in February through April. So February through April of 18 is when we ship our materials. And I just wanted to kind of backtrack it here a little bit. On December 15th is our deadline to get people registered for the program. So from July to December 15th is when we'll be registering our partners. So it's a long window for us to kind of beat the drum and hopefully get people to show up and participate in the program. And for participants, we'll be reviewing and updating their address list beginning in February, and then we'll be processing the LUCA submissions from February to September of 18. And lastly, I just wanted to kind of put out a couple questions to address the committee. One of the things we've had a couple of meetings with some nonprofit organizations, and one of the things we talk about here is how can organizations like nonprofit organizations work with tribal, state, and local governments to promote the participation in LUCA and to ensure full coverage in the address list, not just promoting, but potentially providing address information to tribal, state, and local governments, and kind of getting other people involved between. Traditionally it's been, LUCA has been the Census Bureau's relationship with tribal, state, and local governments. And so if there's a way we can kind of loop in other organizations that have a stakeholder interest in the housing or address list and communities, we'd be happy to hear different kind of ways we could kind of promote that. And then how can we promote and support the program with fewer resources? I think we're doing a good job with the promotional workshops. I'm a little more worried as we get into technical trainings. Those are traditionally 2 to 4 hours long and more technical in nature. Those are harder to do on webinars, and we're going to need more support on. So if the committee has ideas on that as well, I'd be happy to hear them.
Well, thank you, Brian. I think the committee is like, okay, Didas, why did you want us to, you took us through some pretty complex and intricate stuff. And I think I wanted the committee to see that because we can't forget that the decennial census is an address-based enumeration, right? Which means if you don't get this very complicated stuff right now, and you get people signed up December 15th to participate in LUCA, then, they don't get an invitation to it. And then you got to look at the Be Counted forms, the real-time, non-ID processing, and it gets a little bit more complicated. So I wanted to show this, but I think what I want to emphasize is that we usually don't hear about it because it's the local update, meaning it's the cities and counties that have to do this work. And I think in your cities and counties, people are strapped for finances. They maybe have a planner, or they got to go to the local county to get the planner, who may or may not have GIS, background. But I also want to point out that I had our first meeting in San Diego, so I'm putting on my California hat now. And I met with the San Diego County and all their folks close to the Mexican border and just, urban and rural areas. And, they're getting ready to do it, but there's areas that may not show up and may not participate. I also talked to a city manager in the Central Valley who's like, well, yeah, we have all the addresses. But so my question to those planners and to those highest elected officials in those areas is, how do you know what you don't know, right? How do you know that I have this Meals on Wheels CBO that knows that there's 2 more residents living behind this garage, but it doesn't have an address? And so I think, I don't have any answers, but what I'm seeing real time is you have planners and GIS guys, working really hard to answer and to get this back. And by the way, once you sign up in December, you hopefully have already gathered up that local data, because once you get the list in February or March, you have 120 days to compare it to what the census is giving you, and then that's it, you've got to compare to their list, and you need to update it. And again, that's the invite list. Nobody gets to come to the party. It makes it harder to come to the party. But so my question, I think, and Brian's also asking is, I haven't figured out a way in California of how do we get community-based groups who know where maybe these not so legal or units that may not be permitted, because all the city planners I talked to said if I found an unpermitted thing, I have to tell my building inspectors, and they got to go over there and, kind of drop the hammer on there. So I've been asking, can cities give like an amnesty for LUCA purposes for addresses? So anyways, I just wanted to preface her, like, why are we looking at this? But
Can I address that real quick? So I love that you asked that question. And so because We have a Title 13 relationship through the LUCA program with these governments. The governments have to swear and sign a lot of Title 13. They have a security checklist and a Title 13 security form that they have to fill out saying they're only using our data for this purposes of the LUCA program. They have to destroy it afterwards. So if we prevent, and we ask that they kind of avoid a conflict of interest by if somebody's a site inspector or a code enforcement inspector, that they don't participate in the LUCA program. That person doesn't participate. But they're sworn by law that they can only use this data for the purposes of the LUCA program. Afterwards, they have to destroy the data. And so I think what Dita's called out is that relationship is between us and the governments that sign those forms. Is there a way that there could be like MOUs or something done between, other organizations and the government so they can have that kind of same relationship?
Miley?
Aloha, Smaile. Thank you for your presentation, Brian. I have two quick questions. You mentioned, and I appreciate the mention of tribal, state, and territorial, or tribal, state, and local organizations and governments. I'm assuming you're also working with the Native Hawaiian Homestead, the Department of Native Hawaiian Land. The census has always been inclusive of looking at tribal territory as well as Native Hawaiian homesteads, who are definitely people on the ground who have definitely more understanding of some of our areas, which on GPS may not show up as easily given our tropical, lush environment. So just want to make sure you're using and working with our indigenous communities in Hawaii and our government agencies. And then also about your map, on your slide shows Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico, but I'm just making sure that in your efforts, you're also including the Pacific territories and out in Guam and the American Samoa and all the other places that are still yet included in this census.
Okay, I'd love to include them because I really want a reason to go there. But so there was a push to develop the master address file for the Pacific Island areas beyond Hawaii, but the master address file was not created. So because of that, there's no LUCA program because there's no address file to kind of deliver to them. We are working with the state of Hawaii, and I think I think this is part of the conversation with DITAS is that we need to find ways to work with the Hawaiian Homelands groups to figure out a way to kind of coordinate their review so that they're being included as well.
Carol and then Yolanda.
I have a comment and a question. I'm sure this is generally true of other tribal areas, but in Alaska, we are having a robust conversation about our inability to use post office addresses. There is largely no such thing as a rural route or a contractor route. Even a location description is unlikely to work. We are talking about how we can help Census with those addresses, and I just want to lodge that concern as part of your presentation because we don't know the answer. And my guess is we'll be having conversations with you, but I don't think Alaska is the only exception to that. I don't know how, when you're completely off any road system, you would have any other way to connect where someone lives other than a post office box. I would also say that some of our populations are migratory. And so they're very seasonal. They live in one place one year and one part of the year and one place in another. So they may not even have a permanent address or may give one where they're not living at the time the census is taken. So I just wanted to give you a sense of the conversation we're having within our state. My question is, you reported all states have either communicated with you or provided the list back to you. What is your experience with the tribal governments, and what kind of response have you received from them, if in fact you're including them in your outreach? Thank you.
So when I say a list back, it was the contact information update form back. I don't have the tribal numbers. I did a sort by entity type, scroll through the states. I did see we had a whole chunk of tribal level governments responded. I can get that information though and provide that back to the committee.
Great, and if I could just add one thing, answer to your second question, I would add the Native American Indian Housing Council to your list. There are over 400 members who largely manage all the housing on reservations and in Indian country. They would be a great connection for you, and I'm happy to provide the contact information.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Can we have Luke, and then when Yolande gets back to her thing, we'll.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for your update. Just to give a couple of, I guess, comments to some of your questions above, and you might have done this, your team might have explored this, but just still throwing it out there. Have you guys reached out to like local Board of Elections and County Board of Elections to kind of confirm addresses that you may not have?
We have, through what we're doing for Luca is we actually reach out to the governments and we give them a list of different address sources they could use. Assessor source, election source is one of them. And we're trying to kind of direct the governments in this is how you can build your address to support the Luca program. And the elections is a good source because it's not we're not just looking for addresses, we're looking for residential addresses.
Right.
So it's important that the partners can differentiate commercial addresses, libraries, things like that from residential addresses. So through our kind of our Luca materials, we have kind of a list of different sources for addresses, and that's one of them.
And for the second part, I wanted to chime what Carol was saying, just looking at, special interest groups that may serve specific populations. They may have a robust database where they may do mailings, or they may even do outreach where they go to those hard-to-reach populations. So that might be a search that you all should do.
Okay, thank you.
Arturo? Oh, I'm sorry, wait, Yolande was next, and then Arturo.
I have a question. I wanted to add on to what Lucas said. Do you also use DMV records?
DMV is one of the government sources that we point to. We've done some evaluations on DMV records, and they're not as good. One of the things I want to point out that we've done some detailed evaluations of our master address file within the past couple of years, comparing it to several different commercial sources, at least 5 different commercial sources, and nothing has come close to the completeness and accuracy of our file, which has been really impressive. So I think because of all the partner files, the tribal, state, and local government files that we've gotten in, I think Luca is going to be much easier this decade because this is the first decade where we've made an effort to update and maintain the map from not only the Postal Service, but from tribal, state, and local files as well. And so we think it's going to be a much easier process, this decennial, for our partners. And so I think DMV is one of the sources that I think our administrative records frame people have looked at. And again, this is another kind of state level government file that we're kind of pointing partners to when they participate.
How about tax records?
That's as well, yes. The assessor site is one of the great, I mean, that's something we actually use. A lot of assessor sites are actually online now, so we've used it for in-office canvassing and other sources. Mm-hmm.
And just to stress again, this is the local update, so they're going to provide it, and so I think sometimes it's the assessor in that county who's actually doing the update to the file. So these are all great suggestions, but I think we need to make sure it gets out to the locals. Again, we have, and I want to ask what the participation rate was for the 83,000 whatever entities, because I know we didn't have that many in California that participated last time, and they just went with what they had, so.
Yeah, so we had 11,500 governments participate in Luca last decennial. Out of the 39,000 is our eligible governments. 11,500 participated. One of the things we want to stress is we're really looking for coverage as well. We're stressing that we understand there's a lot of governments who won't be able to participate. They're smaller governments, and we want them to kind of work with if a small town can't participate, can they work with their county or ensure that the county is participating? If the county can't participate, can the state participate? Same with tribal governments, can they work together? So we'd like to have kind of full coverage across the nation where tribal and state level governments are participating in regional planning areas on behalf of governments that are unable to participate. So in that mode, one of the things we're going to do during our registration process is we're working on putting a story map together on our Luca website. So in July, when we start getting people registered for the program, everybody, it'll be public, that you'll be able to see which governments had registered and which haven't. And so it'll be easy to do follow-up calls or working with the state data centers and our FSCPE group that are willing to support us with follow-up calls and kind of pestering their communities to participate. But having that out there will also help all the governments work together. So if a town knows that the county's participating, or a county knows that the town's participating, maybe the county can work on the unincorporated areas or what have you, or they can kind of communicate their reviews. And so that's one of the ways we're hoping to kind of get the idea that we want full coverage out there, not necessarily 39,000 governments actively participating.
Arturo?
Thank you. I actually wanted to refer back to a presentation this morning about the address canvassing that is planned for 2019, which I guess would be after the LUCA process is completed, and that there were some plans to change the address canvassing process from in-office to in-field. And that's what Debbie reported anyway this morning. And just wanted to learn more about that. And it sounds like that will also be a more expensive activity and budget implications as well, given where we are.
Sure, thank you. Let me clarify that a little bit, if I may. What Deb talked about this morning was a rediscussion, so to speak, of the program changes that we announced in January of 2017. In January, and let me give a little context, and then I'll announce that program change again. The way we had designed in our operational plan the approach for in-office address canvassing was that the in-office address canvassing component itself would consist of two pieces. First, what we call an interactive review, where we have a lot of clerks. That's a very technical term, a lot, but we have a lot of clerks doing work at our National Processing Center, where they are looking at two vintages of imagery combined with other data to do a first pass of that block. Coming out of that first level review, they're either classifying the blocks as stable or not stable, or they have more technical terms, but essentially stable or not stable. If a block was classified as not stable, it would move on to its second level review, which was something that we called active block resolution. The decision that we announced in January was to suspend the active block resolution component of in-office address canvassing. We are not canceling in-office address canvassing, just the second component of that. The impact of us not completing that second level of review is that any block that is classified as not stable coming out of interactive review would go directly into the pool of eligible blocks for in-field address canvassing. The result of that, to your specific question, is that we have increased our estimate at this point of the percent of the infield address canvassing workload from 25% to about 30%, or a 5 percentage point increase. That's also why I think we were talking earlier about the area census offices. We had previously said there would be about 30 or so of them opening on an earlier timetable in support of address canvassing. Now we're planning to open about 40 on that earlier timetable to support that increased workload.
And this is all post-LUCA?
This is all post-LUCA, yes.
All right, any other questions? Oh, Hassan, there you go, and then.
Two quick suggestions regarding the second question. In 2007, in Detroit, almost 2/3 of homes were vacant. And the mayor is obsessed and focused on repopulating the city. And he's been doing an amazing job in this regard. So I know that he has detailed data on which homes are occupied, which homes aren't. So a suggestion, maybe you may want to get in touch with him. And also consider talking to Habitat for Humanity. They could probably be a source of information for you.
Hassan, did you say it was the mayor of Detroit?
Of Detroit.
Okay, because it's somebody probably in the mayor's office that's actually doing the local update. So I'm hoping.
He's a hands-on,
So it'd probably be,
micromanager.
okay, well, probably be the
He-
city
he
planner
knows.
or the assessor, yeah. So that's the thing, is that you guys reached out to the highest elected
Yeah.
official, and then they task it out to
sure.
someone to
Yeah,
do.
through the GSS, we've actually gotten some Detroit urban blight files and some data sets from the city of Detroit that they provided to us that indicate where the housing units remaining, where they've removed housing units. So we've actually gotten some good data from them already to support this. So.
Well, if there's no other questions, I want to thank Brian for coming, and Deirdre for allowing him to present. And again, I just want to stress that this is happening right now, and by December 15th, if your local folks have not signed on, this is the one time in the decade that you get a chance, that locals get a chance to affect the master address file to which the forms are sent to. So I just can't stress any more than that, because, it's game over kind of after that. They'll do update leave and that kind of stuff, but let's get it right now. So,
Could I have just one more question? We have the state universities in New Jersey, and would any of those be involved? I mean, they're state funded.
Correct. We'll reach out to the state and local governments in New Jersey, and, we encourage them to work with anybody that would have address data. So if I'm working for the state of New Jersey, I'm aware that the state universities have, we work with the state data centers a lot too, which are primarily housed out of the universities. So they generally support kind of the address frame and support the LUCA program, actually from soup to nuts for the state data center. So I think through them, I think they are working with the universities.
all right, thanks, Brian, but don't forget my question, which was, please give us a definition of group quarters that we all can use and be on the same page.
That's one of the things we're working on right now with our user materials.
So I think we're going to take a short break. So 15 minutes, be back at 2:47.